Anybody here yet? Hi, Elizabeth. I was thinking it was like a Zoom call, and I was waiting for you to say hi back, and then I realized it's a YouTube Live, so I can't hear you. COVID has changed it forever. I'm gonna wait just a minute or two and see if anybody else shows up. Otherwise, it's you and me, kid. Not like I'm calling you a kid, just that, that's what one says. So Elizabeth asked, how does paper 2 work? What are good strategies to tackle it? I'm not sure what you mean by how does paper 2 work. Can you give me a little more info on that? Did I ever share the paper 2 Bible with you guys? That might be. Guess it's the paper 2 and 3 Bible. In terms of examples of questions or examples of sample papers? Okay, so the thing I shared in the chat, the paper 2/3 Bible, I just want to point out that the times and the format of the test is a little different because you guys are still getting modifications for COVID. Paper 2, you have to answer, and I honestly, I don't remember what the choices are for this year because I know that it's different, but I don't remember the details of it. So I would ask Mr. Hawley about that because he'll know. So for paper 2, I think part of the key is making sure that you answer questions from the right section of like the topics that you guys have covered. So let me see if I can find a recent. Here's a 2019 exam. Oh, wait, can I share my screen on YouTube? What if I can't? I don't think I can. It's been a while since I did this. Okay, let me just give you an example of, so this is the 2019 exam. So the topics are split into just like on your paper 3 samples, like topic 1, society and economy, 750 to 1400. You guys have done diddly squat on that, so please do not answer those questions. They cover a ton of topics, and you just want to flip to the end and get to the ones that you guys have covered, which are, I think starts with topic 10, authoritarian states in the 20th century. There could also be something in like topic 9 that you could talk about, evolution and development of democratic states from 1848 to 2000, because you've definitely done that for like the German states and the Italian states. But because of unification, that also gets a little sticky. And then causes and effects of 20th century wars and the Cold War. So basically, you're flipping to the end of the paper and just reading those last questions. And then I think the way that it works this year is you have to draw a question. Hi, Matthew. You have to pick a question from, I think you have to do 2 questions and you have to pick them from different topics. But I would double check with Mr. Hawley on that. Paper 2 is historically, I think, has the lowest scores of the exam, in part because it's just kind of it lends itself to compare and contrast, which I think is harder to do. The good news is I just heard my cats creating some sort of destruction upstairs. Sorry. For HL paper 2 is only 25% of your grade, which I think I explained to you last year I think this is one of the advantages of doing it HL. For SL, it's 45% of your grade. But the questions are written in such a way that they're broad. So for instance, a paper 2 question from 2019 is, the use of force was the most important method used to maintain power in authoritarian states, discussed with reference to 2 authoritarian states. So whichever authoritarian states you've studied, those are the ones you use as examples. Where I think paper 2 can get sticky is, for instance, when they're talking about authoritarian states, this particular question was about maintaining power, not consolidating power. So you just have to look for words like that and make sure that you're addressing what they're saying. Another question under authoritarian states was compare and contrast the impact of the policies of 2 authoritarian states on women. For causes and effects of 20th century wars, the first question was, foreign powers did not determine the outcome of civil wars, discussed with reference to 2 civil wars, each from a different region. That's the other part where paper 2 can get sticky. You can't discuss generally like World War I and World War II, both from in Europe. You could discuss like World War I in Europe and World War II in the Pacific or something, but you can't just stick to the same region when it gives you that kind of limitation. Another question here was examine the effects of the peacemaking processes that followed 2 20th century wars. I think if you just Google paper 2 examples, you'll probably be able to find some. You might look at activehistory.co.uk. I haven't looked at that site recently for paper 2 samples, but he usually has some good samples and how they scored. So that would be a good place to start and just see if he has any there. I know some others are just around. And ask Mr. Hawley too to share some paper 2 samples with you. All right. Do you guys have paper 3 questions for me? There's 11 of you here now. Yay. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can see who they are. Nope, now there's 10. I said there were 11 and now there's only 10. And now it's just showing Matthew and I in participants. So I don't know if that's correct or not because it says that there's 10 of you here. Now there's 11 again. All right, well, ask me questions, guys. Discuss and explain. Let me share some definitions of the command terms with you. I think the biggest thing is that IB is never asking you to do something as simple as tell me the story. So even when they say discuss, let me share the command term definitions here. I think there's actually fewer than this now than there used to be. And I would have to look at a list to see what they are. But here's the technical definitions from IB. And also this is Googleable if you're looking for it later. So if you click on that link, it says discuss means offer a considered or balanced review that includes a range of arguments, factors, or hypotheses. Opinions or conclusions should be presented clearly and supported by appropriate evidence. So just kind of, I think discuss is really similar to what extent, except instead of answering like a lot or a little, you're kind of looking at maybe a range of topics and then thinking about, your analysis of what makes the most sense. So for instance, if it was asking you, to discuss the use of, what was that question, that other paper 2 question a second ago? I don't have it handy again. But if they were asking you to discuss the relative importance of, I think it was about force in the maintenance of power in authoritarian states, you don't want to just say, yeah, force was important, or here's all of the ways in which authoritarian states used force. You want to say, how did they use it to maintain power? Maybe you look at like, use of, I'm trying to think, I'm just thinking of the Nazis off the top of my head. But maybe you could talk about like the secret police, and you could talk about, armed thugs in the streets or something like that. And then you could weigh that within different countries, like how important were the secret police in Nazi Germany versus under Stalin. I forget which authoritarian states you guys have done. Is it just Stalin? If somebody will just list them in the chat, that will help me, because COVID, like I said, they've adjusted your test, and I don't remember exactly how Mr. Hawley decided to cut things down or change things. And then what was the other exam term? Not discuss, but oh, right, Japan and Italy. Right. Okay. Um, and then explain is also, explain is not one of the command terms, but examine is. And that's just like, it says consider an argument or concept in a way that uncovers the assumptions and interrelationships of the issue. So again, it's not just asking you to like vomit out everything you know. It's asking you to like tease out what's important and highlight which things were more important than others. So thinking of like a French Revolution example of, I think I gave you guys a question about to what extent were economics a cause of the French Revolution. You can talk about, economics are important. They cause all of this, starvation and struggle in France. But then maybe you say, but what matters is how all of these economic events triggered political uprisings. And then you could connect it to like, you see economic events amongst the urban poor, and you could talk about how the bread shortages led to the March of the Women, which had this huge political impact. You could talk about the economic impact of the bankruptcy of the government and the massive debt that the government was in, and how that led to the um, creation of the Estates General. And if you'd done a good job organizing those things ahead of time, I think it would make sense to have the political events be in chronological order. So the calling of the Estates General paragraph would come before the Women's March paragraph. What other question? Did that help? Do you want me to talk about command terms some more? Oh, here. Aiden asked, can you go over the 4 main figureheads of Italian unification? Yes. And by the way, I want to point you all, it actually should be, how do I share my channel with you? I think I shared my channel or I had Mr. Hawley share my channel. But all of the old lectures that I've done on World War I and the French Revolution are on here, as well as I'm pretty sure there's like an 1848 to Unification live review that I've done. So you guys might want to go rewatch some of those videos. So the 4 big figureheads of Italian unification, do you remember what their nicknames were? Anyone can type them in the chat. Don't all answer at once. All right, I'm just going to talk because I'm not seeing chat about that. So the 4 big people are, okay, well, Matthew's got him there. So Cavour, Garibaldi, Mazzini, Victor Emmanuel II. And then you could also add the spoiler, which was Pope Pius IX. So Cavour is kind of the brains of the operation. He's the practicer of realpolitik. Pre-1848 unification, pre-1849 really, unification in Italy had been very liberal and idealistic, with like the creation of the Roman Republic and all of these states kind of pushing away from Austria, but they don't really have a unified vision. They don't have a plan for how exactly unification is going to happen. And Cavour is very practical. He's like, I don't care about as much about whether it's liberal or conservative, though he is conservative and he wants a constitutional monarchy. But what he cares about is that Piedmont leads it. And it doesn't matter what he has to do. He's going to organize things to make sure that Piedmont, kind of comes out of this as a powerhouse, Piedmont, Sardinia. So he organizes the war against Austria, which is the Second War of Italian Unification. He has these secret deals with Napoleon III, the Emperor of France. And then I think we also talked about how he and Garibaldi meet outside of Rome. And Cavour's a little nervous that Garibaldi will like just kind of take over the whole peninsula, because he was fairly popular. And Garibaldi eventually will throw his support behind Cavour. I think it's really worth reviewing your Italian unification annotations, because it's going to remind you of things that you don't remember. Excuse me. I'm going to go to Mazzini next because chronologically, I think he comes first. Mazzini was really he's kind of the father of modern Italy in the sense that he founds Young Italy, which was a secret society aimed at uniting Italians specifically against Austrian rule. After the Congress of Vienna, Austria had control over the northern half of the peninsula, and the kingdom of the Two Sicilies were controlled by a Bourbon king in the south. And Mazzini, he's very much a romantic. He really gets people feeling Italian. He draws off of the old Carbonari traditions, and the Carbonari had been uniting against the Austrians for a while. I think unification is actually a great topic to review because it's much more like condensed. You only have so many named people. I think it's more straightforward than the French Revolution. But I also think it's something that if you're gonna, I've seen so many questions that are like evaluate the role of Garibaldi in unification or one of those four big people. Um, but make sure that you have some good details about each of those four, that you can remember some specific things that they did, and you can kind of think critically about which ones were most important and why. So Mazzini for kind of the romantic, the feeling, but he's fairly liberal and idealistic. He's a Republican at heart. He founds or helps to found the Roman Republic in Rome in 1848 to 49. But they don't have a real plan for ruling. They create this triumvirate. Garibaldi helps to defend the Roman Republic, but they don't succeed. And so Cavour thinks more practically about, okay, well, what do we need to do to succeed? Whereas Mazzini kind of like seizes the opportunity of the revolutions of 1848 to create that republic. And Garibaldi so his nickname was the Heart. Cavour was the head, Mazzini was the heart. Garibaldi then was the sword. And Garibaldi was pretty popular. He was there in 1848 to 49 with Mazzini defending Rome against the French and other troops. And Garibaldi will start his march south in 1860. I guess it was actually the march to the north because he starts in Sicily and then starts marching north. His goal was just to bring the nobles there to the cause of Italian unification and to squash any resistance, I guess. So he's kind of going bit by bit up from Sicily and then on the ship again up the peninsula, toppling these noble families, and gains a lot of popular support. A lot of people just kind of join him on his path. His thousands or his red shirts were under his command and were they just grew in numbers as they went. Garibaldi meets Cavour outside of Rome, and then they have to make this decision. Like, is Garibaldi going to keep marching north and maybe take the whole thing for himself? Is he going to throw his weight behind Cavour, who really supports a constitutional monarchy? And is Garibaldi going to give up that idea of a republic? And Garibaldi does. He compromises in a way that I don't think Mazzini would have. Matthew asked, how often do you see paper 3 questions referring to Enlightenment topics? Matthew, there may be some paper 3 questions about the Enlightenment, but we did not cover the Enlightenment in the depth that I would love for you to have if you're going to actually answer a paper 3 question. How I would use the Enlightenment is if you're asked a question about the causes of the French Revolution, it's a great long-term cause. And there's various places where, like, this Enlightenment Locke's idea of, like, if the state is not protecting life, liberty, and property, which are natural rights, there's 3. I just kept counting, but there's only 3. Life, liberty, and property, then you have not just a right, but a duty to overthrow the government. That idea of the social contract is that, like, the ruler is working for his or her authority comes from the people, not from a divine right. So I think that's really applicable to the French Revolution. But the paper 3 topics on the Enlightenment, let me see if I can find one here as an example, because I don't think we got enough into that that I would recommend you answer one. Let me just find. All right, this is the May 2019 exam. So the last pre-COVID exam. And as an example, here's the unification question. Garibaldi was the most significant leader in the process of Italian unification. Discuss. The other unification question was, evaluate the importance of Bismarck's policies in the achievement of German unification by 1871. Both of those seem super doable to me. Here's the French Revolution question. Evaluate the reasons for the Thermadorian reaction. So, like, why does the terror happen? Why does not the terror, I guess, like, after the Constitution of 1791, they go from having a moderate constitutional monarchy to a republic. So that's what they're asking about, like, evaluate the reasons for the creation of the republic. The Enlightenment question is, evaluate the political impact of Enlightenment ideas in 2 of the following: Germany, England, Scotland, France, Spain, the Dutch Republic, and Italy. We didn't break it down that way by country. And then the growth of cities was the most significant social and economic change in the Enlightenment era. Discuss. So I would not spend a ton of time reviewing that other than how it relates to the French Revolution. I just think your time is better well spent. Like, here's the World War I question. German foreign policy did not lead to the outbreak of the First World War. Discuss. I think you guys have a lot that you could say about that, and a lot less about the Enlightenment questions. I think this is a pretty good question about Mussolini. Evaluate the success and failure of Mussolini's domestic policies between 1922 and 39. I just feel like all of these questions are better to answer than the Enlightenment questions. And you guys will only have to choose 2 from paper 3, so that's cool. And just make sure your paper 3 questions, they have to be from different parts of the test. Like, they can't both be French Revolution questions. All right, what other questions do you have? This is so weird. It shows me that there's 9 people here, but then it says there's no participants. Do you want me to just talk about German unification? Sure. I know that there's a review video that I did on unification, but I don't know that my lecture on unification is up there. But let me share my notes with you all. Oh, actually, this is a handy PDF these are like quick little, I don't know, they're like encyclopedia entries practically, but they're, it gives you a good overview just to make it fresh. You should know more information than's on these, but it's a start. So the first one was, I think, German unification, and the second one is Italian. Here is my unification PowerPoint. I'm just dumping some resources in the chat for you all. Maybe you can share them on a group chat or something. Okay, so unification, you really have to think about 1848 with both Italy and the German states, or the Italian states and the German states. I'm sorry if you can hear my cats in the background. They think it's dinner time and my husband's not home, so they're bothering me instead of him. Okay, so German unification, there's a lot fewer people to remember because I really think Bismarck is the center of a lot of it. But I don't think he holds sole responsibility, and I don't think that he is, quite as much of a mastermind as it might seem. I think a lot of things happen that he takes good advantage of, but I'm not sure he necessarily planned it out, over the course of the next 10 years. All these wars are going to happen. He saw opportunities and he seized them. So if you look at the German states, there's a lot more German states after the Congress of Vienna than there are Italian states. There's only 9, and there's like 90 some German states. So it's kind of a mess. Economically, it's a disaster because like every time you cross a border, you might have to pay a toll or like an import tax. The laws might be different, like you just don't know. And so the first thing that they do in a step towards economic unification is the creation of the Zollverein, which is the customs union, which makes it so that, and if you're looking at my lecture notes that I put in the chat, everything in blue, that was basically a free trade zone after 1834. And then in gray, it included that region until 1866. And then after the Austro-Prussian War, which is a big turning point in unification, that area is excluded. And then the red border is like the old German Union of 1828. Prussia and Austria, I don't remember if you guys remember Großdeutschland and Kleindeutschland. So Großdeutschland was big Germany, or I remember gross because it's like a big gross booger, which sounds gross, but it might help you remember the word. So Großdeutschland was big Germany. In other words, it included a unification of Germany with Austria. And Kleindeutschland was without Kleindeutschland was small Germany, which was unification without Austria. Austria complicates German unification because it's so multi-ethnic. So Austria has, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Croats, Slovenes, like all of those countries in the Balkans that become independent later were part of the Austrian Empire. Czechoslovakia, parts of Poland, Hungary, all of those were parts of the Austrian Empire. So how do you have a nationalist project when you don't have a nationalist majority? It was so multi-ethnic that it was just not, nationalism was destructive there and in the Ottoman Empire. Whereas in the German Empire, what would have become the German Empire, it was much more homogeneous, so much more German-speaking ethnic Germans. So Prussia kind of comes to the lead of that after. I would say in the years between 1848 and 1866, Prussia is kind of on the rise and Austria is kind of on the decline. Metternich flees Austria in 1848 as a result of the revolutions there. So that's going to be destabilizing for them. And they're kind of dealing with their own issues. So for instance, the creation of the dual monarchy in 1867 basically gives the Magyars self-rule within the empire. Kaiser Wilhelm I was the Prussian emperor, And with Bismarck, we talked about the terms you would want to know would be realpolitik, and then the quote from his Blood and Iron speech that the matters of the day will not be decided by speeches and majority decisions. That was the mistake of 1848 to 49, but by blood and iron. Don't forget to review your 1848 notes either. 1848 really sets the tone for unification in the Italian states and in the German states. 1848, they were trying to decide between Klein and Großdeutschland, and they offered the throne eventually, after some debate, to the King of Prussia, Frederick Wilhelm IV, and he famously said, "I will not take this crown from the gutter," because he thought parliaments didn't have the authority to offer a throne to him. Only the princes of the German states did. So Bismarck learns from that and says, okay, the matters of the day will be solved by blood and iron, in other words, by war. So the first war is over Schleswig-Holstein, the Danish War in 1864. Schleswig-Holstein had been annexed by Denmark after 1848, and the Danish War is basically Austria and Prussia getting together and going back after those regions, saying that Denmark had poorly treated Germans in those areas. So after the war, Prussia gets Schleswig and Austria gets Holstein. So you end up with this big Prussian region, an Austrian region in between, then Prussia, and then Austria below that. So geographically, it didn't really make sense, but not much in the German states did. And 2 years later, the Prussians will basically, Bismarck's trying to make Prussia the dominant German state, not Austria. So they'll basically accuse the Austrians of mismanagement of Holstein, and the Austro-Prussian War lasts for a whopping 7 weeks. It's also called the 7 Weeks' War, and Austria is defeated pretty quickly. The last battle was the Battle of Sadowa. And at that point now, Prussia has Schleswig-Holstein, and more importantly, they have Austria kind of licking its wounds, and they're going to be in charge of unification. So they create the North German Confederation immediately afterwards, which is basically taking all those German states, excluding Austria from it, and creating a new confederation that has kind of Prussia leading all the other German states. Then you have the Ems dispatch, where Bismarck provokes France into war by editing that telegram from Wilhelm. And that was over a conflict about who was going to be the heir to the Spanish throne. And so the French wake up on July 15th. What's the significance of July 15th? Why do I care about July 15th? You're French. It's July 15th. What have you done the night before? Yes, Bastille Day, Bastille Day. Oh, good. It's all coming back. July 14th is Bastille Day. So basically the night before you were watching fireworks, you were getting drunk, you're feeling very French and patriotic, and you wake up the next morning and you see the Ems dispatch in the newspaper, right? And you're like, forget the Prussians. So that's how the Franco-Prussian War begins. Bismarck provokes the French into declaring war on the Prussians. The Franco-Prussian War is the one that we listened to the podcast about. It was brutal. Paris was surrounded for months and blockaded. There was no food getting into Paris. The Parisians are starving. They eat rats. They eat the zoo animals. I can't remember where I left my keys, but somehow I remember that the elephants in the Parisian zoo in 1871 were named Castor and Pollux, and they were eaten by the Parisians, but only if you were rich, because you had to be rich to be able to afford any kind of meat. Um, Eventually, the French, before the war is even over, the French go to Versailles, the fanciest room in France, and declare the creation of the German Empire, which is like a big to the French. The war ends shortly thereafter, and the French are pissed, and that's part of the long-term animosity between the French and the Prussians. Like, when the French are, rushing to the first Battle of the Marne in 1914, they're saying, "Do it for Alsace." Alsace-Lorraine was the territory that the Germans would gain after the Franco-Prussian War, and for each of the steps in unification, whether for Italian and German, just know, okay, this war, they gained this territory. This war, they gained this territory. And hopefully you have that in your notes, which you have taken so nicely last year, right? I'm going to go back because there was a question about the causes of the French Revolution. That's huge. And I know that my videos on that are really good. So I'm going to put a pin in that for just a second, Nick. I'll come back to it, but I want to talk quickly about Napoleon because I think he's a little simpler. I'll share my Napoleon PowerPoint with you too. You guys are going to share this with other people who aren't here, right? But maybe for a price, like it's totally fine if you are like, well, I showed up and you didn't, so I'm kidding. Don't do that. But I wouldn't, blame you if you at least joked about doing that. Let me make sure this is the right one. Yeah. Okay, so here's my Napoleon notes. Big things to remember about Napoleon. First off, we have his successes as a military ruler. His first big success is conquering the Italian peninsula during the wars of the French Revolution. And don't worry about memorizing all 7 coalitions of the French Revolution, but I would go back and look a little bit at the wars about, the first war was about basically, Austria and Prussia attacking the French, and the French were like, maybe we can get some food out of this so we can feed our people. The third coalition brings in Britain. You get the Continental System complicating things. And then the 6th coalition is Napoleon's defeat, where he's sent to Elba. And then his final defeat is at Waterloo with the 7th coalition. Speaking of the Continental System, once Napoleon becomes ruler, starting on his coup d'etat is November 9th, 1799. He takes over the directory. Don't forget to review the directory. Do you remember the directory? Napoleon at first rules as one of 3 consuls. There's a consulate. And then he's like, okay, how about I'm the only consul? And then he's like, how about I'm consul for life? And then he's like, forget consul. How about I'm emperor for life? Or emperor and then emperor for life. So, he's just expanding his role throughout that period is, I think, the big idea. And big reforms that he makes would be like a military based on merit. I would say that's kind of a reform that comes out of the French Revolution, but Napoleon is the epitome of that because he was successful. Pretty minor figure, really, until his military success. The lycée system, the secondary schools, which were supposedly free, but really that was just if you were like super talented and maybe well placed. But the average peasant isn't going to K-12 education yet, but maybe like your rich merchants are. It's at least better. The Continental System, which blockaded Britain from all trade on the continent. And what else do I have on there? I'm forgetting something big. Oh, the Concordat with the Pope. The Concordat, I mean, just religion in the French Revolution is complicated, right? Because, of the insistence on reason over religion. Religion was like old and traditional, and they're trying to move away from all of that. Also, the French government is paying for a lot of its wars by confiscating papal land in France. So basically, the Concordat says, well, Catholicism will be the religion of most Frenchmen, and the Pope will accept the lands lost during the Revolution. When Pope Pius VII renounced the Concordat, Napoleon actually marched him to France and placed him under house arrest. The lycée system is the education system. And the whole reason that was created, by the way, is for the education of bureaucrats. Like public education was created as a service to what the nation needed, not what individuals wanted to study. So like you guys getting to choose a major or something, that's not what they're talking about. They're like, okay, you need to read, write, and do math so that you can collect taxes and like run the state. The Napoleonic Code was the biggest one I was forgetting. There are some great details on the Napoleonic Code on that long article we read about private life in the French Revolution, about how the reasons for divorce went from 10 to 7 to 3. I think I haven't read that article in a couple of years, so I don't remember all the details, but it's also worth reviewing your annotations of that. The Napoleonic Code was just about standardizing civil code across France and all of its conquered territories. So it has a huge impact on all of those territories because it's bringing the ideas of the French Revolution to all of the territories that Napoleon conquers. It reforms the French legal code. It's meant to be enlightened and modern. It meant that when you went to Marseille, the laws were the same as they were for buying and selling things were the same as they were in Paris, and so were the laws about marriage. There's a list of things in that PowerPoint of kind of the things that were included under the Napoleonic Code. It's definitely much more revolutionary and enlightened than the previous code, but there's also some things like it wasn't necessarily great for women, like they could be imprisoned for adultery. They lost their property rights that they had gotten during the revolution. You could talk about Napoleon naming himself emperor, crowning himself emperor, I suppose. And then there's some information in there on the military campaigns, the Peninsular Campaign, and the invasion of Russia. Okay, let me go back now to Nick's question about the causes of the French Revolution. I've seen so many questions over the years. There's almost always a question about the cause of the French Revolution, and I think it's a great question to answer because we spend so much time on it. But every once in a while, they'll throw a curveball, and there won't be any questions about the causes of the French Revolution, and they'll only ask about the wars of the French Revolution or something. And then I'm like, no, that's not. We do so much better with causes. I just think that we spend more time on that, and it's so complicated. But there's also, that means that there's all sorts of details for you to remember. So looking at the stages of the revolution, our first stage is the bourgeois stage, or the middle class stage, also known as the moderate stage. And the bourgeois stage is actually Marx, looking back at it later, calling it that. It's the middle class. It's the third estate saying, we're not doing it this way anymore. We demand representation. So Louis XVI, I saw a question a few years ago that was, to what extent did Louis XVI, or is he responsible for the French Revolution? And that's interesting because he bankrupts the state, which leads to the calling of the Estates General, which brings all of these enlightened members of the Third Estate together, and they're in the same room, and they're like, yeah, we'd like to vote the same as everybody else. So when the Estates General meets, there's the issue of voting by head versus voting by estate. The traditional way was they voted by estate, so 97% of the population, aka the third estate, got one vote. Second estate, the nobility, got one vote. And the first estate, the clergy, because God first, that's how I remember it. That's how they would think of it anyway, got one vote. And so the third estate is pissed at this. Like, they've read the Enlightenment now. The States General hadn't been called for over 100 years. Voltaire has brought all of these ideas of John Locke to France. Rousseau has everyone thinking about like the natural order of things and the social contract and how that should work and how people have a responsibility to each other and their community. And the third estate was like, this is not what any of this looks like. So they start demanding that they vote by head, which would have given them a slight majority, not by estate. And my lecture notes should all be in those YouTube videos, so you can look at those. The third estate is then locked out of the Estates General, and they retire to the tennis court on June 20th. The Estates General first meets in May. On June 20th is the tennis court oath. And at the tennis court oath, they promise to stay united until they write a constitution and declare themselves the National Assembly of France. So they've just created a parliament, basically. The king's not thrilled with this. He starts gathering troops, and there's rumors that he's going to disband the National Assembly in Paris. He's sending troops to Paris. So the members of the Third Estate storm the Bastille to get guns. They let like 7 people out of prison, but it's nobody important. That's not what it was about. The Bastille becomes this huge symbol on July 14th, 1789. Remember 1789 because 789 because it was Hungary. July 14th, I just remember because it's 10 days after the 4th of July, so that sticks in my brain. But the storming of the Bastille becomes this huge symbol of the people like overthrowing the king's authority. And for the rest of the revolution, like they make a big deal of that. Like you could go picnic at the Bastille and help tear it down and take a piece of the brick home with you. And it's not standing anymore there. There's just there's a neighborhood called the Bastille, but just a monument to where it was. So on Bastille Day, they storm the Bastille. The governor of the Bastille comes out to talk with the revolutionaries, and they cut off his head, put it on a pike, and parade it around town. I have a little guy with his head. It's a little Lego guy. We could parade him around town. Look, see, this is the governor of the Bastille. I don't know if he had a beard or not. After Bastille Day, the National Assembly starts putting out, this is all the bourgeois phase, because they're still talking about a constitutional monarchy, starts putting out legislation. The big ones are the August decrees, which end, and they're like, July 14th, the August decrees are just a couple weeks later. From the 4th to the 9th of August, they end feudalism, they make everyone equal under the law, those kinds of things. The Declaration of the Rights of Man comes out in August of 1789 saying, these are basic, it's similar to like the American Bill of Rights, like these are the basic rights of all Frenchmen, not women, and also not like the question of whether or not women or free blacks in the colonies or Jews were included as citizens of France and full rights of citizenship was debated. That was kind of part of what we got into with the Haitian Revolution a little bit. So they take a little while to write a constitution. In the meantime, the great fear happens in the countryside with the poor in the countryside freaking out that the nobles are going to come and steal all of their grain. So they sort of preemptively attack the nobles' homes. So this is another way you really want to think about perspective, right? Like you've got the urban poor in the Women's March, which I'll get to in a bit, the countryside poor, the rural poor, freaking out about food with a great fear. You've got the middle class with the tennis court oaths. Like they're all doing things differently and they want different things. The Third Estate just wants to be given equality under the law. They probably have, a lot of them, plenty of money, but the poor people in Paris are just starving. And the urban or the rural poor owe all of this labor to the manor houses, and so they all have different motivations. That I think is a key idea with the causes. So you have these long-term economic causes of the massive debt that the government's in because of the maintenance of Versailles, because of the American Civil War, not Civil War, the fighting in the American Revolution. The 7 Years' War was really expensive. Like they've been fighting the British for a long time. That's what's going to cause that short-term crisis that leads to the States General. But then you also have a grain crisis with, the price of bread increasing rapidly. So there's all this discontentment in Paris. In October of 1789, that's going to lead to, like, they're literally out of food. All these women go to the market at the Hotel de Ville, and there's no food, there's no bread to be had. So they literally grab some cannons off of the Hotel de Ville. It's like city office. Hotel in French just means like big fancy manor house, and the Hotel de Ville is the hotel of the city. So it's basically like the mayor's office, I guess is what you call it, the city government. So they grab the cannons off the front of the Hotel de Ville, and these peasant women armed with like a couple of cannons that they roll all the way out to Versailles, which is miles and miles, and pitchforks and like basically whatever they can grab, start marching towards Versailles. And when they get there, they're pissed. And they think that Marie Antoinette, this like dirty foreigner, is hiding all, that's how they saw her, not me, is hiding all of this grain at Versailles, which she wasn't, but like Versailles did have plenty to eat while the Parisians didn't. So they demand food. They demand Marie Antoinette. The Marquis de Lafayette tries to kind of negotiate with them because he was um, he was a kind of enlightened thinker. He'd helped fight in the American Revolution. He understood what people wanted, but he was also noble, right? He was a marquis. Marie Antoinette's servants, I think a couple of them are killed. Their heads are put on pikes. Marie Antoinette fears for her life. She's like hiding with her children. And basically, these armed peasant women. So we're talking from January of 1789, when he calls the Estates General, to October of 1789. You go from having a broke but fairly stable monarchy to a bunch of poor women from Paris demanding that the king and queen move back to Paris so that they really understand how the real people live, and so they can be closer to all the action. So you're starting to see this shift to this more radical action, but you really can't talk about the radical part of the. I just realized in my video, I think I said the Thermadorian reaction was the radical phase. It's not, it's a conservative phase. So if I said that earlier, sorry, I just was not. I get jumbled when I'm talking live. But anyway, the bourgeois phase continues. Eventually, the king and queen, after the October days, which starts with the March of the Women, the king and queen are sort of forced under house arrest at the Tuileries, which is their palace in Versailles, which is like next to where the Louvre is now, not in Versailles, in Paris. Eventually, the king and queen try to flee after Louis had been forced to accept the Constitution of 1791. Marie Antoinette's boyfriend, a Swedish count, helps them flee the country. They get to Varennes, and somebody recognizes them because even though they're dressed as peasants and their servants are dressed as rich people, I guess they're dressed as servants, not peasants. Louis's face is on the money. So a postmaster in Varennes recognizes him. They capture him. They basically send him back to Paris, and everybody's pissed off. The Austrians and the Prussians threaten the French and say that if they harm the king or queen, Paris will be leveled. In 1793 of January of 1793, they'll execute the king, beheading him. He's basically tried for being a traitor because he tried to flee the country. And when he left these nasty notes about the Constitution and everything. Once you kill the king, you can't have a constitutional monarchy anymore. You have the birth of the political classes or political parties, the Girondins, who were a little more conservative, still revolutionary, still Jacobins, but wanted to just like exile the king, maybe not kill him. And the Montagnard, who voted by a small majority to execute him. The Girondins had more support in the countryside, the Montagnard more support in the cities. I would go rewatch those French Revolution videos because one, you probably already have notes on them. Two, I think the videos are going to say in a more organized way than I just have what I just said, because I tend to bounce around a little bit when I'm live, but when I have my notes in front of me, it's more orderly. And hopefully then you can just like kind of have your notes in front of you and be, highlighting or boxing or whatever the things that are important. The next phase of the revolution starts with the radical phase. Actually starts with Girondin rule after, but then once the king is executed, that begins the reign of terror. Robespierre becomes the head of the government, and he's just executing any kind of enemy of the revolution. That's when things get really crazy with the creation of the new calendar. Notre Dame becomes a temple of reason. All of these new festivals, the persecution of anyone who wasn't, sufficiently revolutionary. If you weren't wearing your cockade, which is that little thing on my Napoleon hat, the little red, white, and blue ribbon. If you you had to be enthusiastic about the revolution or you were suspect. And Robespierre becomes kind of a tyrant, and he's suspicious of everybody. So he starts killing people, and he's executing all these Girondins. His friend Danton is like, hey, these guys are revolutionaries too. We maybe don't need to kill them. And for that, Danton is also executed. Like basically anybody who showed any difference of opinion to Robespierre ends up getting executed by the Committee of Public Safety. The CPS is the key body there, which really was just a committee of the National Assembly. Sorry, the National Convention. The National Assembly has become the National Convention because on 9/22/92, so September 22nd, 1792, France declares itself a republic. Now it's ruled by the National Convention, and the CPS, the Committee of Public Safety, is just one committee of that, but they end up being kind of running the show. They're also, enforcing the draft, which is keeping the wars going. They're squashing religion, and there's a lot of backlash to that. So they're keeping themselves very busy. The last phase of the revolution is the Thermadorian reaction, because it starts in the month of Thermidor on our new calendar, which was July. Robespierre comes out in front of the National Convention and says, we need like one more purge to really cleanse the National Convention and make the revolution pure. And they're like, no, because you're probably going to come for us. And they attack him, stab him. He lies bleeding on a table, and then they put him in jail, put him on trial the next day, and execute him the next day. That's the end of the radical phase. Then the Thermadorian reaction, they create the Directory. So you had the Council 500, the Council of Elders, which, if you recall, were similar to the House of Representatives and the Senate. You should have some notes on that. And I don't want to get too much into that, but there's some inflationary pressures they have to deal with. Culture gets kind of frivolous again. They're not getting a lot done, though, and so that's kind of why Napoleon is... The Council of Elders kind of calls him in for advice, and he's like, coup d'etat. Whew, that was a lot, man. You ask one question, I talk for 20 minutes. Sorry, not sorry, I guess. That's what you want me to do, I assume, I hope. Other questions? All right. If you are out of questions, I know that my videos on this page are useful, so start looking at those. Some of my exam tips in general are just to Google. And I know I saw you guys looking at them in class the other day. Did you guys look at some paper 3 question? I don't know what you were looking at, but it looked like a paper 3. If you just Google sample IB questions, they're always like, to what extent did blank cause blank? Or how important was blank? Discuss. So just think about those people and what kind of permutations of questions they could ask. I like to draw little tree maps, like kind of little essay plans for, if this were the question, this is how I would answer it. So you should have, I think, and I know you guys were COVID year, so I can't recall for sure if we did it, but I think that we did a tree map looking at the economic, political, and social causes and intellectual causes of the French Revolution. And under each one, you were supposed to have 3 pieces of specificity, which is basically outlining causes of the French Revolution for you. Just remember, if they ask, to what extent did an economic crisis cause the French Revolution? You can't be like, it didn't, it was politics. You have to deal with economics. Whatever they're saying, to what extent did blank, you have to deal with that thing. You can't just reject it completely and answer something else. You could say, this happened, but this was more important. This happened, but this was more important. This happened, but this was more important. But you're still dealing with the main question about this happened, right? So that would be some general advice. I think just looking at lots of old exam questions, thinking about how you would answer them, reviewing your notes and getting some of that specificity back in your brain again. So go look at your old Quizlets or however you studied for my fill in the blank tests. And because now you got to regurgitate that information, and there's no word bank. Remember, I said there'd be no word bank. There's no word bank. I think too, if you can find some old, like, I know that you were looking at a paper, I think you were looking at paper 3 in Mr. Hawley's class. Like, think about which of these questions would I answer, and where are you seeing some holes? Like, where are you struggling to find another question? I think that with fewer choices now, it's actually going to benefit you. Do you only have to answer one paper 2 question now? Is that right? Am I missing questions down here? Oh, shoot, there's all sorts of questions. There's practice questions with marks here. Matthew, is there a link there? Or was that on the UK site, the active history site? Okay. Any other questions for me? You guys, you really do know a lot. And in the end, your IB scores don't define you. But that doesn't mean you should just go to sleep right now and play video games instead, because they can get you so many credits. And in the end, that's money and flexibility and choice. So you've come all this way, the finish line, you can see it. You're running this marathon. You just got to push through till the end. But don't, also do make sure you're getting some sleep, because, and the more you can spread things out. So like if you study a little history today, tomorrow, and every day, study each of your subjects a little bit every day, then you sleep. Every time you sleep, those of you taking psych, you're consolidating that information in your long-term memory. It'll stick better. If you wrote your IA on something related to our paper 2 or paper 3 topics, you can use that evidence from your IA that's still in your brain as, if it fits. Don't just make stuff up that doesn't fit, don't make stuff up in general, but don't make it work if it doesn't fit. But if it fits, that's great. Same with your extended essay. But you know a lot, so, be confident about it, but now's the time to really consolidate all that information, and hopefully, like, going into your exams, you're going to come out and be like, damn, I nailed that. And you're going to feel good, and it feels really nice. So don't give up at the finish line here. Even if you got into college and got $1 million of scholarships, you should still spend some time on your exams, just in part because it's good prep. It's still, I don't know. It's an experience. You don't want to be like me and have to say, yeah, I majored in English, but I got a 3 on my IB exam. Did you know that I got a 3 in HL English? My dog died the night before our test. I was a wreck. I bombed my oral just because of stress. Yeah, but I still majored in it. It was fine. No other questions? I'm just rambling now. I thought you'd have questions like, who was blah, blah, blah. If you are out of questions, I will stop talking. So speak now or forever hold your peace. Napoleon's watching you. And so is Louis XIV. And so is his doppelganger. And so is Marie Antoinette. That's all I got. Oh, no, not just kidding. The whole Palace of Versailles in the snow is watching you. All right. Shoot me emails if you have questions, but I think you guys got this. You know how to study for stuff now. You're going to be whizzes. Sorry, my cat's also yelling at me, so it's another reason to wrap this up. No more questions? All right. You're welcome. Let me see if I can open my do you have the link to my YouTube channel where my old lectures are? Or should I post it? All right. I think you have it. So I'm going to let it go. Great. All right. Good luck, you guys. You got this. Right before you go into all of your exams, go 1, 2, 3. I know this thing I shouldn't say on the internet. All right. Good luck, guys.